My arrogant CEO declared that employees must work weekends for free, mocking. If you were truly loyal, you'd do it without complaints. When I refused, he fired me in front of the entire staff and scoffed. People like you are replaceable. The next day, the entire office was empty, because I took his best employees with me. I used to work for a mid-sized tech company in Austin, Texas. It wasn't some massive corporation, but we had a solid reputation in cybersecurity. When I first started, the company was actually a great place to work, decent pay, good benefits, and most importantly, an amazing team. That all changed when we got a new CEO. His name was Martin Calloway, and he was the worst kind of executive, the type that walked into a room and immediately made you feel like dirt. Martin wasn't just a boss. He was a walking ego with a Rolex. He treated employees like disposable cogs, acted like he was God's gift to business, and somehow believed that loyalty meant working yourself to death for free. I tolerated him for as long as I could. But then, one day, he went too far. And that's when everything unraveled. It started with an all-hands meeting. We all got an email the night before, saying it was mandatory, which was never a good sign. The next morning, we gathered in the conference room, coffee in hand, already exhausted. Martin stood at the front, grinning like a man who just found a new way to exploit us. This company is at a turning point, he announced, pacing the room. And that means we all need to step up. If you truly care about this company, if you're really loyal, you'll prove it. Starting this week, Saturdays will now be workdays. At first, no one reacted. Then someone, probably thinking they misunderstood, nervously chuckled. Martin snapped his head toward them. I'm serious. You're all expected to come in on Saturdays. And before anyone asks, no, you won't be paid for it. That's when the murmurs started. Confused. Angry. Disbelieving. But Martin wasn't done. Loyalty isn't about money. It's about commitment. If you're dedicated to this company, you'll show up. No questions. No complaints. My coworker, Dan, raised his hand. Martin ignored him. Dan, not one to back down, spoke anyway. We already work 50, sometimes 60-hour weeks. You expect us to just give up our weekends for free? Martin smirked. He actually smirked. No one is forcing you. But if you don't want to be here, we'll find someone who does. By the time we got back to our desks, the email was already in our inboxes. Mandatory weekend work policy, effective immediately. HR followed up with a FAQ email, basically saying, no, we wouldn't be paid. No, we couldn't use PTO to get out of it. No, this wasn't a temporary policy. Morale tanked overnight. People went from motivated professionals to burned out zombies in a matter of days. For the first few weekends, people actually showed up, mostly out of fear. But it didn't take long before employees started calling in sick, missing deadlines, flat out ignoring emails from management. Martin noticed. And he hated it. I made it 2 Saturdays before I'd had enough. That Friday, as I was packing up my stuff at 5 p.m., I got an email from Martin directly. Subject: your attitude, you seem resistant to our new company culture. We need team players, not complainers. See you tomorrow. I stared at it for a good 5 minutes before replying. I won't be coming in. The next morning, I got a phone call at 8 a.m. I ignored it. Then another at 8:15. Then a third at 8:30. Voicemail. I hope you're on your way. You do not want to make me come find you. I turned my phone off. Monday morning, I walked into the office like nothing happened. Sat down, opened my laptop. Business as usual. Or so I thought. At 9 a.m. sharp, an email went out to the entire company. Subject: all hands meeting. Now my stomach dropped. I already knew. The entire company was gathered in the main conference room. People were whispering. Some looked concerned. Others looked amused. Martin stood at the front, arms crossed, looking thrilled with himself. He pointed directly at me. Stand up. I did. This company is built on loyalty, dedication, teamwork. And yet, some people think they're above that. He turned to face me fully. So tell me, why do you think you're so special? I glanced around. People weren't just watching, they were waiting. Waiting to see what I'd do. I took a breath and said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Because I don't work for free. Silence. For a second, Martin actually looked thrown off. Then his face twisted into a mocking smile. You know what? If you're so unhappy here, let me make it easy for you. He turned to the room, gesturing wide. Everyone, take a good look. This is what happens when you're not a team player. Then, in front of the entire company, he fired me. Get your things and get out. You'll be forgotten by Monday. He was so sure of himself. So certain that he was untouchable. I just smiled. Because he had no idea what was coming next. I didn't argue. Didn't plead. Didn't even react. I just grabbed my things and walked out. As I stepped into the parking lot, I could still feel the weight of everybody's eyes on my back. Some of them looked horrified. Others? They looked like they wanted to follow me. Martin thought he had won. That was his first mistake. That night, my phone blew up. Coworkers, friends, even department heads, all reaching out. That was insane. Are you okay? Martin's lost his mind. Half the office is pissed. I want out. Tell me if you've got something lined up. At first, I just scrolled through them. I wasn't sure how to respond. Then, one text changed everything. It was from Nathan, the head of our biggest client account. Call me. We need to talk. Nathan wasn't just any client, he controlled millions in contracts. If he was upset, Martin had a much bigger problem than me. I called immediately. Nathan didn't even say hello. What the hell is going on over there? I explained the situation. The forced weekend work. The firings. The chaos. He listened, then sighed. We're not happy. We've been getting sloppy reports. Missed deadlines. My team's losing confidence in your company. That wasn't surprising. Half the employees were burnt out. The other half were too pissed to care. Then Nathan said something that made my stomach drop. We're considering taking our business elsewhere. I sat up straight. If they left? It wouldn't just hurt Martin. It would destroy him. But I needed to play this carefully. What if I could offer you another option? I asked. Silence. Then, go on. I wasn't bluffing. Not really. Because I already had a backup plan brewing. See, I'd been in talks with a competitor in Dallas, a rival company looking to expand. I had a standing offer from them for months. I just never had a reason to consider it. Until now. So, I called their VP of Operations, Ben Carter, and laid it all out. How would you feel about onboarding an entire team of trained professionals? And a client worth millions? There was a pause. Then he laughed. If you're serious, get me names. We'll make this happen. That's all I needed to hear. I spent the next 4 hours making calls. By the time I went to bed, I had 10 of the best employees on board. Nathan ready to move his contract. A meeting with Ben the next day to finalize the deal. Martin thought I was replaceable. By tomorrow, he'd find out he was the one who never should have been there. The next morning, I walked into my usual coffee shop. I had barely sat down when my phone buzzed. It was Dan, one of the engineers. Dude, you need to see this. Attached was a video. I clicked play. It was a recording of Martin, standing in the middle of the office, screaming. Where the hell is everyone? People were resigning left and right. Some just left their badges on their desks. Others were clearing out their lockers while HR watched helplessly. Martin was losing it. And it wasn't just employees. Clients were calling, asking questions. Emails were flooding in, demanding answers. And then, the board got involved. At exactly noon, I got a text from a former coworker. Martin just got called into an emergency meeting with the board. He looked pale as hell. I leaned back in my chair, smiling. I had one last move to make. I sent one final email. Subject: You said we were replaceable to Martin Calloway. Hey Martin, just wanted to check in. I heard the office is a little empty today. Hope you're doing okay. Also, if you need good employees, I know a great company in Dallas that just hired a whole team. Let me know if you want me to send over a job application. Then I hit send. And waited. Because I knew. This wasn't over. Not yet. After I sent that email, I waited. I wasn't sure what kind of response I'd get. Rage? Panic? Silence? I didn't have to wait long. An hour later, Dan called me again. This time, he was laughing so hard he could barely breathe. Martin just, holy SHT dude, he just fired the entire HR department. Asterisk, I nearly dropped my phone. Wait, what? Yeah. They told him they couldn't process all the resignations fast enough, and he lost it. Started screaming about incompetence and loyalty and just fired all of them. On the spot. That was bad. Really bad. Not just for Martin, but for the entire company. Because now, there was no one left to hire replacements. The company was bleeding out, and he had just ripped out its last artery. But that wasn't the only problem. Because at the same time Martin was firing HR, something much worse was happening behind the scenes. And I had a front row seat. At 3 p.m., I got another call. This time? It was from Nathan, the client. His voice was sharp, urgent. Hey. Did you know your company's finances are a mess? I frowned. What do you mean? Nathan sighed. We did a full review before making the switch. Your company's books are off. A lot of payments don't add up. That caught my attention. Like how bad? Bad enough that if the board finds out, heads will roll. I sat back, mind racing. Missing money? Unaccounted payments? There was only one person who had total control over the budget. Martin. I had always known he was greedy, but this was next level. I needed more information. And I knew exactly who could get it. I called Mia, our former senior accountant. She had quit 2 weeks earlier, fed up with Martin. When she answered, she sounded beyond relieved to hear from me. Oh, thank God. I was hoping you'd call. That set off alarm bells in my head. Why? Because I still have access to the company's financials. And I've been digging. She took a deep breath. There's money missing, dude. A lot of it. And I think I know where it went. I felt my pulse spike. Where? She hesitated. Martin's been rerouting company funds into an account under a different name. I think he's been siphoning money for months. I stared at the wall. This was way bigger than a power-hungry CEO throwing tantrums. This was fraud. And now? I had proof. I spent the next 2 hours going over everything Mia sent me. Massive transactions disguised as vendor payments. Client invoices that had been marked, paid, but never deposited into company accounts. A shell company registered under a fake name, but linked directly to Martin's personal address. This wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. And I knew exactly what to do with it. I forwarded everything to Nathan. Then, for good measure, I sent it to the board. By 5 p.m., my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Former coworkers. Clients. Investors. But then, I got the message I was waiting for. From an unknown number. Meet me. Now. 801 West 5th Street. Martin. He had just figured out what was happening. And he was desperate. I grabbed my keys and left. Because I wasn't done yet. Not until I watched the whole thing burn. I pulled into the parking lot of 801 West 5th Street, an upscale restaurant in downtown Austin. The kind of place where executives made shady deals over overpriced steaks. I already knew what this was. Martin wasn't inviting me for a meal. He was desperate. I stepped inside. The hostess barely glanced at me before nodding toward the back. Martin was already there, sitting in a private booth, hands clenched around a glass of whiskey like he wanted to break it. His face was flushed, his eyes sharp with anger and something else, fear. I slid into the seat across from him. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then, he leaned in. What do you think you're doing? I didn't even blink. Exposing you? His jaw tightened. You don't know what you're playing with. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us. I know about the missing money. The fake invoices. The shell company. He froze. That was it. The moment he realized he was completely screwed. But instead of panicking, he laughed. A slow, humorless chuckle. You think you're some kind of hero? He shook his head. Newsflash, kid, this is how business works. You cut corners. You take what you can. If you're not willing to do that, you'll always be a loser. I just stared at him. This was it. His real face. Not the arrogant CEO. Not the smooth-talking executive. Just a man who built his career on lies and thought he was untouchable. I picked up my phone. The board knows. The clients know. The SEC is probably going to know by tomorrow. His smirk vanished. You wouldn't. I tilted my head. I already did. His hand tightened around his glass. You think this will ruin me? I'll bounce back. You'll be nothing. You'll never work in this town again. I leaned forward. You don't get it, do you? I let the word sink in. It's over, Martin. You lost. Martin lost it. He slammed his glass against the table, spilling whiskey everywhere. Heads turned. People stared. But I didn't move. Because I knew something he didn't. Right at that moment, his phone buzzed. He looked down. And his face drained of color. Slowly, I pulled out my own phone. Check your email. I had waited until I was sitting across from him to send the final nail in his coffin, a forwarded email from the board. Subject, termination notice Mr. Calloway, due to recent discoveries of financial misconduct and fraudulent activities, your employment with this company is hereby terminated, effective immediately. Legal action is pending. His hands shook. For the first time, he looked small. Weak. You set me up. I laughed, standing up. No, Martin. You did this to yourself. I turned to leave, but he grabbed my wrist. Wait. His voice was low, hoarse. You can fix this. I looked at him, really looked at him. A man who had spent years thinking he was untouchable. And now? He was begging me to save him. I pried my wrist from his grip and took a step back. You said people like me were replaceable. I smiled. Guess that makes you disposable, too? And I walked away. By the time I got home, the news had already spread like wildfire. Martin Calloway, CEO, disgraced, under investigation for fraud. Employees who had been too afraid to quit before? They were resigning in droves. Clients? Jumping ship. And me? I was officially hired at the rival company in Dallas, with double my salary. A week later, I got one final email. From Martin. Subject, you and I hope you're happy. You ruined everything. I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. Because he was wrong. I didn't ruin anything. He did that all by himself. I won't lie, there was a moment when I wondered if I went too far. But then I remembered, he fired people in front of their coworkers for loyalty. He stole from his own company while demanding we work for free. He thought he could get away with it. And the thing is, guys like Martin always think they can get away with it. Until they meet someone who's willing to burn the whole thing down. I don't regret a thing. And if I had to do it again, I wouldn't change a thing.